the story is that, as you know, after leaving imprisonment, Nelson Mandela comes to lead South Africa and decides that actually what he's going to do is that he's going to essentially build bridges between all the opposing factions, because he has a very disunited country, and what he needs to do is to bring it all together. His associates want to sever any ties with the previous regime, but he says, at least in the movie, he says, no, what we're going to do is that we're going to be all inclusive, we're going to embrace our former enemies. Therefore, he immediately gives jobs bodyguarding him, for example, to people who his associates feel that in the past, just a few months ago, were beating them up and locking them up and treating them appallingly. He tells everybody working in the government that no matter if they feel that they want to leave, fine, doesn't make any difference, but he is willing to take on all comers. And most importantly, and of course I knew nothing about this, but you may well have done, the initial feeling from his camp is that the Springboks, who have become a sort of hated symbol of apartheid, will be dismantled. And he says, no, actually what we need to do is we need to keep the Springboks, and we need to let them keep their colours, we need to let them keep their name, we need to let them keep their identity, and what we need to do is back them and turn them into a winning team behind whom the country can unite. And he calls in the captain and he explains to him how he's going to do it. His clip.
On Robben Island, when things got very bad, I found inspiration in a poem.
A poem?
A Victorian poem. Just words, but they helped me to stand when all I wanted to do was to lie down. But you didn't come all this way to hear an old man talk about things that make no sense.
No, please, Mr. President. It makes complete sense to me. On the day of a big match, say a test, in the bus on the way to the stadium, nobody talks.
Ah, yes. They're all preparing.
Right. But when I think we're ready, I have the bus driver put on a song, something I've chosen. One we all know, and we listen to the words together, and it helps.
And that song is, of course, Agadoo by Black Lace. Now, as you can hear from that clip, Matt Damon is doing, I think, a really terrific job. Morgan Freeman, I think you do need to say this, his accent is going between Robben Island and Shawshank, because there is a lot of Morgan Freeman. Did you notice that in just that clip we heard as well?
Well, to start with, I thought it was a fantastic Mandela, because he had the whole tone and intonation, but then it did become... There's a lot of Morgan in there.
There is a lot of Morgan in there. And it's funny because I was thinking of Christian Mackay playing Orson Welles. Didn't get Oscar nominated, incidentally. Should have been Oscar nominated, I think. He's BAFTA nominated. And he was describing how when he played Orson Welles, what he did was something which I can't do. He opens his throat out in order to drop the voice down into a different, so it's using a different part of his larynx. And it sounded to me like Morgan Freeman is doing that in terms of his voice is dropping down. He's got the mannerism, he's got the pacing right. What he hasn't quite got is... the accent's not quite there. Now, that's not necessarily a killer problem, because if you think, for example, of Anthony Hopkins in Nixon, which I always cite as the great example of somebody who doesn't look anything like Nixon, but somebody who physically manages to move in a way that implies Nixon, even and Sir Anthony Hopkins' accent as Nixon wavers equally. So it doesn't wholly undermine the performance. And I, of course, am the person who thinks that Dick Van Dyke's accent in Mary Poppins doesn't matter, because I think you have to get beyond that. But it is worth saying. Now, there is also apparently some question about whether or not, because Invictus is the poem which is invoked in the title, about whether or not that is actually, that is a poem that he had on a scrap of paper when he was in prison. It has been reported that, in fact, the poem that he then gave to Pinwell was Theodore. Wasn't the poem. He gave him Theodore Roosevelt's "The Man in the Arena" speech and said, this is the. But so there's a certain amount of dramatic license. I don't know what the truth of it is. And in a way, it doesn't matter, because you have to take the drama on its own terms. And I've read a couple of people saying, well, the problem is because Nelson Mandela is such a big and important recent character that there's a sort of cop out in the movie that he's sort of played saintly. Well, here's the thing. Morgan Freeman, started off came to really popular attention through doing Shawshank Redemption. He then went on to play the President of the United States in various disaster movies, and most notably is Deep Impact, I think, is one when the meteor was going to come and kill everyone. And then he played God in Bruce Almighty. So obviously from there, the next step up is to do Nelson Mandela. And I think the thing about it's a very difficult role, because Nelson Mandela is held in such high esteem by almost everybody. It's like, you remember the Pythons said that when they first started doing Monty Python's Life of Brian, that originally they wanted to call it Jesus Christ Lust for Glory, and then they said, well, we can't, but actually they wanted to do that idea about taking somebody who's completely revered and then and somehow and mocking and being not in a nasty way, but in a sort of satirical way, or Mother Teresa, what a git, because that in itself has comic potential, but it's a comedy thing. So I think as far as the idea of playing him as essentially good is perfectly fine, because I think he is essentially good. Also, it's not true to say that the movie cops out of dealing with his personal problems, because there are nods all the way through to the fact that while whilst he is being preternaturally good, his home life is very difficult and disintegrating. He has fraught relationships with his family. In fact, one of the things that I thought was really good about Morgan Freeman's performance is there's many scenes in it in which you see him complimenting everyone who works with him, being nice to people, mentioning, oh, that's a nice haircut, how is your child, this, that, and the other. And some people have said it's just like, he's too good to be true. Actually, it felt to me like what Morgan Freeman was doing was injecting into those moments an air of performance, that he's having to appear preternaturally good, that he is playing a man who is better than he actually is. I thought that was very clever. I thought that it actually looked like somebody acting being good as opposed to somebody simply being good. Point number one. Point number two, it's the best rugby movie I've ever seen.
How many have you seen?
Well, Up and Under.
Right. That's it.
I was struggling
it's better
to think.
Than Up and Under.
Well, yes, I was struggling to think of other rugby movies. I'm sure there are many. Please text us in your favourite rugby movie. But I didn't know how the match played out. I didn't know anything about the team or his backing of the team. And to be honest with you, I don't really understand rugby. Although my brother was a fantastic rugby player and captain of the team and broke almost every bone in his face, head, and everything playing rugby, which is one of the reasons why I never wanted to play rugby. One of the things that the film does that has been sorely underreported is that it makes the rugby matches interesting and gripping, even if, like me, you neither know nor care about rugby. Obviously, you do know how the thing plays out, because what happens is effectively Mandela says to the team, you have to go and win, you have to go and do this to represent our country. But I didn't think it was in any way given that we know how the end result, but presumably you did. I felt like when I was at Radio 1 and I saw Apollo 13 with Wendy Lloyd, and she said the thing that was really exciting is she didn't know whether they got back. Well, I had that experience with Invictus. Was that I think
you could say it was general knowledge, given that the iconic photograph of Nelson Mandela in the South African rugby shirt was such a key moment.
Never occurred to me.
And the presentation of the trophy, that's the moment on the poster. So it's
it didn't occur to me. Is it on the poster?
Yeah.
No, it's not. That's the poster.
Different poster.
Well, that's
You're just choosing posters to win the argument.
That's Matt Damon smiling. That's Morgan Freeman's back, but he's not holding it. So you think that everyone would know anyway?
I think, in general, yes.
Fine. Well, I'm sorry if Simon just spoiled the ending for those of you who didn't know. But for those of us who didn't know, I thought it was quite grim because I wasn't sure where they were going to. But in the end, the point is that what you have, from my point of view, is you have a very good rugby movie that makes rugby exciting. You have a movie in which Morgan Freeman's performance, despite the fact that it's vocally somewhat challenged, is cleverer on many levels, and I think people are giving it credit for, because I do think that his performance of a man being good is clever. I think that Matt Damon was standout because he convinced me in what's essentially a very bland role. I mean, the role that he has is a bloke who's a not very interesting character who sort of has to become inspirational by dint of stuff that's happening around him, and I thought he got with that. But most importantly, I thought watching the rugby was exciting and thrilling, and by the end of it I was genuinely biting my nails and wondering how this was all going to play out.